Hey y'all, it's BB Soto coming to you from my bedroom desk office. Not sure why I'm announcing myself like as if I'm a news anchor, but that just felt like what I was going to do today. We're going to talk about the High Priestess card today. And I will admit, I have been just daunted and intimidated and not sure where to start or how to make this flow because there's so much in this card. Um, and then just so much in the folklore, the mythology, everything behind what's in this card. And so where to start, I'm not really sure. But I think what we'll start with is, you know what, I'm going to start with the Pope Joan interpretation. So I've picked up several books with the Rider Smith Waite card as the example, who then dive into the Pope Joan myth as an interpretation. The only place that he mentions anything similar to that is at the beginning, where he's kind of giving you a brief overview, and he talks about how some people sought to term this card the mother or Pope's wife, which is opposed to the symbolism. Nowhere else does he go into it being that it could be Pope Joan. In his own longer description, his actual key to the card, nowhere does he mention Pope Joan. And the only thing I can think of is that originally, like in the Visconti Tarocchi deck, okay, so we're going back the 1400s, 15th century, okay, they had a La Papessa. This is not a tarot deck, this is a card playing game. They had a La Papessa card. Okay, it is said, I found a couple references that this Visconti family from this time in the Middle Ages, we're getting towards the Renaissance, like towards the end of the Middle Ages and in kind of into the Renaissance. Um, they had an ancestor who was somehow associated with the Pope Joan myth. The Pope Joan myth is that in sometime in the early Middle Ages or like mid Middle Ages, a woman pretended to be a man and rose all the way up the ranks in the church to be pope and was found out when she gave birth. There is one pope, Pope John, who was said to be very effeminate, so they think maybe some historians maybe think that that could have been either the actual Pope Joan or the inspiration for the story because people were probably like, making fun of him behind his back and saying that he was actually a woman pretending to be a man. However, the Visconti family is said to have an ancestor who belonged to a group of women who were trying to reform the church by allowing women to become popes, and their ancestor was executed for this. So there is some thought that the reason there's a La Papessa card is they're paying tribute to that ancestor. The Tarot de Marseille card continues by having La Papessa or La Papesse, because this is French now, not Italian. And so, but at some point around this same time, that and with the same intention that Smith and Waite had to redo the deck and make it more accessible, they are following a different tradition that had changed the name to High Priestess. They are not following the Tarot de Marseille tradition. They are specifically and intentionally deviating from it, and they are calling their card the High Priestess, which steps away from Catholic connotation and the Pope Joan myth and goes more into a pagan interpretation, or polytheistic interpretation, or into that, remember, they were a part of a secret society, the Golden Dawn, okay? They were literally part of a secret society. So they're going more into that esoteric, occultism, paganism, that kind of realm, which is where the only reason I could think some people might continue with the Pope Joan is because she has this cross. We'll get into that in a little bit, but all of the other symbolism, I'm going to look again. I'm sorry, excuse me. Yeah, I don't see any other symbolism that lends towards the Pope Joan thing. So, I personally don't understand why so many tarot uh, writers who I would hope have gone and read what Waite had to say about his own deck are continuing with the Pope Joan thing. Um, However, I did like some of the interpretations of it being Pope Joan means that like women who like break the glass ceiling. I did like that feminist approach and everything, but the symbolism in this card doesn't speak to Pope Joan. So that's where I move on to the headdress. I mean, that's one of oh, okay. I have my light on today. So the headdress. The headdress, I originally when I got my first deck, it was a very cheap Rider Smith Waite reproduction. I have since recently bought the Pamela Smith Coleman commemorative set that came out in 2009, 100 years after the original deck. Um, that this, I saw this as like a triple moon reference, and I know I'm not alone because I've read again a lot of writers who leave out the fact that Waite never mentions the triple moon. Waite never mentions the maid mother crone mythology. He never mentions the goddesses that are associated with the triple moon. So I'll admit I was late to the game reading Waite's actual writing on his own deck myself. However, I am reading it, and the one he mentions by name is Isis. The other one is Shekinah, who, if it's my understanding, isn't necessarily like a deity per se, but more the understanding, the embodiment of the holy divine wisdom in Kabbalah. I could be mistaken. If I am, please, with kindness and constructive comments, let me know. I'm not as familiar with the Judaic history and I'm learning the Kabbalah obviously as I learn this along. So, but Isis wears a headdress that is specifically said this. He calls it a globe in the center. It's the sun disk, and these are horns. These are cow horns. So, and he does. He mentions Isis by name, that she's sitting at the temple of Isis. However, these columns do um, also speak to the Temple of Solomon columns. But that's what he specifically states. And so, however, I know I'm not alone in this because so many other writers have said she's wearing a triple moon, and a lot of other artists have interpreted her wearing the triple moon. Let me go. I actually have, I think it's here. So, as you can see, triple moon, triple moon, triple moon in some of the decks that I have. So, however, here we have definitely a much more Isis crown, and then we have some that don't have her wearing the headdress at all or the triple moon at all. We stick with the lunar crescent. And then here, this is the only, no, these two decks right here, this one and this one are the only two that I have that follow the Tarot de Marseille tradition. And because here you can see the Popess, and here they called it High Priestess, but we went with the lunar crescent, which I have been told to indicate Selene, that when she has just this lunar crescent on her head, it's the Greek goddess Selene. So, I mean, I came across reference of Isis, Hathor, Hecate, Artemis, Demeter, Persephone, and then which all kind of led back to for me, to Sophia, who's the goddess of wisdom, based on the Greek word meaning wisdom. However, Sophia is kind of like Shekinah in that she is more of the embodiment of the divine wisdom. And so, not that kind of wisdom that we gain through living, but that kind that we're all just like born with like that ancestral knowledge. So this is the card that is like the embodiment of that. Um, Weight also goes into her being the like basically the knower of the secrets or the knower of the secret traditions. So, and really he makes brief mention of some, to me, very significant symbolism. For instance, he just mentions the lunar crescent at her feet. That's it. Um, he does mention the headdress, and he mentions Isis. He mentions the veil and the pomegranates and the palms, but he doesn't get into like what any of that means. And I think because in the early 20th century in Europe, especially them their ties back to like their Roman and Greek roots are still so deeply entrenched in that culture, that the people of that day probably would have recognized those symbols without needing them to necessarily be as explained. And so, but so we'll get into a little bit of it. So Isis is a goddess. She's a moon goddess. She's a resurrection goddess. So she too travels down to the underworld. Pomegranates are a symbolism of Persephone, who in the Greek mythology travels down to the underworld. Isis gives birth, and depending, I've read a couple different versions of this. So Isis's husband Osiris is killed by his brother Set. Somehow Isis is involved with bringing Osiris back, either by traveling to the underworld, putting him back together and bringing him back and magically being implanted with his seed and then having Horus, or um, one other version I have was like somehow she embodied his dead parts and then like gave birth to him again. Therefore, so who does that sound like? But I just want to get on to, so we've got a link to Persephone through this traveling to the underworld, a goddess of resurrection. But we have a link to Mary in this immaculate conception because in both stories she has given birth to a child, whether it's Horus or Osiris, not through conventional, ways that people procreate, but through some kind of basically immaculate conception. Okay, so, and Mary is also associated with resurrection because she gave birth to her son Jesus, who then died and was resurrected. So those three are connected. And in fact, if we look, Mary and Isis are very connected. In fact, a lot of Mary's imagery is inspired by Isis. So here's a statue at the Egyptian Museum, and it is Isis nursing Horus. Then, if you just go look up medieval images of Mary nursing Jesus, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. And she's surrounded in gold, the sun disk. Mary often has a halo. The Christian adaptation of the Egyptian sun disk that a lot of their gods wore instead were made into halos. Okay, Mary's wearing a veil. Mary's often depicted in blue and with a veiled head because she is the mother to divinity, to the divine wisdom. And so she's the church personified a lot. She's often referred to as the bride of Christ. She's she's likened back to the Song of Solomon, Temple of Solomon. So the way these all connect is insane. I mean, I've spent weeks and weeks and weeks trying to find like this very clear way to explain it in linear way, and I'm just gonna keep working on it. The palms. Okay, so the palms were used by the Egyptians in their funerary rites. They tie to Jesus as in the scene in the Bible when they're laying the palms out as he's walking into Jerusalem. So they also tie to Apollo, who is Artemis's twin brother, Artemis being a moon goddess. So, I mean, it's just insane. But I think, and then see, I get tripped up. Like, look, so we have the blue robes, the veil. The veil goes to Isis and Mary, and this idea that the secrets and wisdom are hid behind the veil. So she's literally wearing a veil, and then she has this veil behind her. So double, meaning of like she knows the secrets. She is the gatekeeper of what's beyond the veil. Like she herself is veiled because she herself is a mystery. And so it is said there's this phrase that, where is it? Where? So there's this phrase about her, oh, I'm on the wrong thing. So there's this phrase on a statue of Isis about how I am all that has been and is and shall be, and no mortal has ever lifted my mantle. And that I've found that attributed to several goddesses that are related to Sophia, to Mary, to Isis, that are related to this embodiment of divine wisdom, whatever religion, culture. And I think that's what Smith was going for. I think that's why we have Greek, Egyptian, we have Catholic with the cross, we have the Torah on the scroll, which is the five books of wisdom that were given to Moses. And then Waite even mentions how it's like half covered in her veil, meaning some are meant to be said out loud, some are meant to be kept known. So I think that's actually the genius of all of this is like somehow in this one card, Smith really has managed to like encapsulate the fact that this is archetypal. This is not belonging to one faith or understanding or pantheon. This is archetypal, that she embodies the mysteries that we all can tap into through our subconscious, our unconscious, the collective unconscious, but yet are mysteries. Um, and so, the lunar crescent, when the moon is at the crescent phase, most of it is in shadow. So even choosing to show us the crescent instead of the full moon shows us that, there's only so much we know, that she knows what's in that shadow. So from here, I'm definitely going to do a segment on pomegranates. But I think that's also going to somehow tie into the Empress because there's also some overlap between the two. So I may do use her as the time. I think we might look at duality in the deck because she kind of introduces this theme of duality that carries into many cards. So we'll probably do that. Then I might look at just goddess symbolism even deeper than I already did now and get maybe deeper into those stories and the connections because like for instance, while she's holding a scroll that says Torah, Mary in her Annunciation, when she's being told about her Immaculate Conception, is often shown holding a book. So there's just so many overlapping ties here. Um, but that's probably what I'll do. I think I'll do the duality and and how that's going to be depicted through these columns and even like the symbolism of columns themselves. Then we'll probably look at. I do kind of want to look at maybe the mantle or the veil symbolism, and then maybe use pomegranates to segue in, or maybe I'll use pomegranates after the Empress and segue back. So we kind of looked at this a little bit, like the variations in the decks that I have. So where you can see this is an all nature deck, so she went with the triple moon symbolism. This is a divine feminine deck, so we have the triple moon, but we do have the orb. Uh, Here we have the book, here we have the scroll, here we have the scroll. So here we have the lunar crescents. And then this is an herbal deck, so this artist stuck pretty close to like we have the two columns, they're not exact. We do have a veil, the pomegranates are missing, and the palms, but we have the lunar crescent, the blue robes. She actually has her eyes. So you see some of them are shown with their eyes closed. Um, and so, yeah, and then the cards that are related to her that I thought of are okay, so if she means divine wisdom, if she means like ancestral wisdom, knowing of the secrets and things like that, then she also talks about our intuition. And so, that to me is she's related very closely to the court cards in the cups because they are all guided by their intuition or in tune with their intuition. Uh, Definitely, if you look at, we have yellow, yellow, right? Like consciousness, consciousness. We move into the Empress card, who is, she's a goddess too. She's a goddess figure too, but she's very much out. She's of the world. She's worldly. Okay, and if you look, we get back to this same kind of muted tone that we have here in the Hermit and in the Wheel. And the Wheel's when, things shift and turn, but here in the Hermit goes inward to find their own guiding light. So this is like the intuition of the being tapped into the universal, to the divinity, the all knowing. And this is like the intuition of being tapped into yourself and being your guiding light. And I did feel like she has almost like this connection with the Justice card too, because while she is all knowing, the Justice card is where we get into that like, I know things because I've learned things and I can see things fairly and I can use this guiding light from that I've learned to tap into from my own intuition to make judgment calls. And then with the water theme and of course the moon and everything, we get into temperance, star, moon. So the moon is things the unconscious rising up. Temperance is like that balance in between. And so, someone who's very intuitive might be very in connection. The star is, she noticed she's on earth, she's in the water. Um, and then this brings us down to the Two of Swords, which is like using the intuition to navigate the mind and the intellect and that analytical mind. And so those are the cards that, like kind of tie back and connect back to her. When it comes to the columns in the dark and the light, the Sphinx, I left that out because I was looking more at the intuitive aspects. But the Sphinx card is another one that probably should be in here as being related because it's the dark Sphinx and the light Sphinx. And then we look at the columns like all the other ones, like Justice, ties back because of the columns. The columns are here in the moon. So we'll look at that when we look at the duality in the columns symbolism. So, all in all, I believe that she's the archetype of the High Priestess because throughout many cultures and religions, even in the Catholic faith, even though they don't want to admit this, at least medieval theologians didn't want to admit this, and the medieval church wouldn't have wanted to admit this. But even then, we have those women who are our priestesses. They're our healers. They're the women that are just tapped in. They just know. They're wise. But they are like the embodiment on earth of this more mythical idea of an embodiment that if you could take wisdom and divine knowing and put it into a body. We also look at the mother, like how many of them have had given birth, immaculate conception. Her crown here, Isis's crown was the supposed to be the hieroglyph for throne, and so she was the embodiment of the throne of whereas Mary is often the embodiment of the church, which is the concept of being the physical vessel that holds that wisdom and that sanctity and that divine nature and gives birth to it on earth. So when you see her, you can think of her as being the knower of the mysteries, and that, to me, this is almost like the collective unconscious card in the deck. And she is the person who is tapped into the collective unconscious. Like she actually knows what's going on in there, how to get back there, how to tap into it, how to share secrets with us. So, if you've made it this far with me, thank you so much. If you're watching this on Patreon and you are a patron, I especially want to thank you so much for your generosity. If you're watching this later on YouTube or on Patreon after it's become free, I would love if you would consider heading over and getting the benefits of becoming a member. Otherwise, please check me out on my website, bbsoto.com. And if you're interested in a reading with me, you can book a reading or you can reach out and contact me about any of the many other hats I wear. So thank you so much. Have a good day.